freedom came to the prisoners of Baldur's Gate in the form of a contract. It was not, perhaps, the kind of freedom any of them would have chosen. They had been dragged from their cells in irons and marched beneath heavy guard into the Archduke's council chamber, where Count de Lucerne waited with his 3 sons and an elderly mage calling himself Evibaren, the erudite. The Archduke's chair stood conspicuously empty. Count de Lucerne wasted little time explaining why they had been summoned. Each prisoner was offered the same bargain: perform a service on behalf of the Count, and they would be given the opportunity to earn clemency for the crimes that had brought them beneath Baldur's Gate. The exact nature of that service remained frustratingly vague. The consequences for refusing appeared somewhat less so. Most of the prisoners listened. Boltax did not. The towering Goliath looked over the contract placed before him, crumpled it into a ball, and hurled it directly into Count de Lucerne's face. For one magnificent instant the room fell silent. Then Evibaren raised a hand. Magic struck Boltax before even the massive monk could react, seizing his mind and leaving the giant stunned where he stood. Negotiations proceeded rather more smoothly after that. By the end of the meeting, every member of the newly assembled company had signed. Every member except Boltax. As it turned out, this distinction mattered considerably less than anyone might have hoped. Once the contracts were dealt with, Evibaren produced a scroll and began a second spell. It was hardly a reassuring performance. The old wizard stumbled over passages, repeatedly mispronounced the draconic incantations, and appeared at several points to be following the instructions with only slightly more confidence than the prisoners themselves. Then the scroll caught fire. Evibaren continued anyway. One by one, the prisoners were branded with magical runes. Some appeared upon arms or legs. Others were considerably less fortunate, discovering the marks upon necks, backsides, and other locations unlikely to inspire heroic ballads. Boltax received his directly upon his face. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, the ebony helmet fused permanently around his head concealed it from view. Thus the prisoners discovered 2 important facts. The first was that whatever magic bound them together did not require their consent. The second was that Evibaran's rather questionable execution of the ritual might have produced consequences no one yet understood. Those concerns only grew when Count de Lucerne announced who would lead them. Not Conrad, his capable warrior heir, not Pharos, the shrewd merchant. Instead, the Count selected his youngest son, Harman de Lucerne, drinker, womanizer, possessor of considerable confidence and rather less evidence that such confidence was justified. What exactly Harman was supposed to lead them toward remained unexplained. That omission particularly troubled those among the prisoners familiar with contracts, magical obligations, and the general wisdom of understanding a bargain before binding one's soul to it. Before they were dismissed, Count de Lucerne pulled Cap aside for a quiet conversation beyond the hearing of the others. Whatever was said remained between the 2 men, for now. The prisoners were given enough coin for food and lodging for the next 24 hours, while Harman attuned himself to a small polished white stone that fit comfortably within the palm of his hand, the control stone, and so, after imprisonment, accusations of murder, theft, treason, arson, and considerably stranger offences, the prisoners of Baldur's Gate walked back into the city. They were technically free. None of them were foolish enough to believe it. With 1 day before their departure, the chain gang scattered through Baldur's Gate to find the people they trusted, or trusted as much as circumstances allowed. Boltax went directly to Nadir al-Sahir. He did not arrive in a forgiving mood. Nadir had been the man who sent Boltax to meet Magistrate Edric Vaughan. only for the Goliath to arrive at a blood-soaked murder scene moments before the flaming fist conveniently burst through the doors. Baltax had spent plenty of time wondering whether his old associate had sold him out. Nadir convinced him otherwise, or at least convinced him enough. Before Baltax departed, the smuggler gave him a simple wooden box and asked him to carry it upriver to Kashashma, a woman who could be found at an establishment called the Bowl of Snakes in Skornubel. No explanation, just a delivery. Baltax accepted. Elsewhere in the lower city, Aidan Vere returned to the apothecary of Elira Than, one of the few people who had helped him investigate the strange laboratory connected to his past. Aidan wanted answers about the massacre that had resulted in his arrest. Elira did not have them, but she had noticed something interesting. For all the bloodshed inside that laboratory, the Flaming Fist had apparently failed to find so much as a single drop of blood upon Aidan himself. That did not fit particularly well with the official account. Elira promised assistance of her own, though not freely. She needed several unusual herbs and asked Aidan to obtain them during his travels. In return, she would give him something useful. Corlin Ziriath, meanwhile, sought out silk among the alleys of the lower city. The young thief had heard whispers, moving through the criminal grapevine. Someone was running an active smuggling operation along the river Kionthar. Whoever they were, business appeared to be thriving. Corvin Ash and Sir Cedric Valen took the rather more civilized approach of finding a tavern. There, Cedric was approached by his old family retainer, Maurice Tollett. Maurice brought him a locked locket. Inside were images of Cedric's son Thomas and another portrait, much older, worn and muddled with age, his wife, a small reminder that imprisonment had not stopped the world outside from moving on. The following morning, the chain gang departed Baldur's Gate aboard a 60-foot trade skiff bound upriver. In theory, such a vessel should have offered ample room. In practice, much of that room was occupied by Harmon's riding horse, which the young noble had simply refused to leave behind. The owner of the skiff was a narrow, pinched-faced fellow who had negotiated an arrangement advantageous primarily to himself. Rather than hiring labourers to pole his vessel upriver, he had acquired an entire collection of criminals to do it for him. The first day passed without incident. The second brought heat. Relentless, oppressive summer heat settled over the river until the deck became unbearable. The chain gang survived by periodically dousing themselves with buckets of Chionthar water. Then came a ferry crossing. The skiff was forced to wait while the ferry rope blocked their passage, and Raven apparently decided this constituted an excellent opportunity for recreation. She stripped naked, dove into the river and swam ashore. She eventually returned paddling toward the skiff with a long river reed clenched triumphantly between her teeth. Fortunately, Imogen had guarded Raven's discarded clothing from anyone entrepreneurial enough to inspect her pockets or acquire any particularly personal souvenirs. Raven fashioned the reed into a flute. Had she possessed even the slightest musical talent, the result might have been charming. She did not. The weather eventually turned. Clouds swallowed the summer sky. Rain swept across the river. Thunder rolled over the Chionthar, replacing the suffocating heat with a damp, miserable journey upriver. By the time the skiff approached El Turel, conditions had improved. The captain's mood had not. He instructed the chain gang to steer as wide a course around the city as possible. Perhaps he had contraband hidden aboard. Perhaps he simply disliked El Turgardian piety. No one asked too many questions. They had almost put El Turel behind them when a smaller vessel changed course and began cutting across the river toward the skiff. There would be no avoiding this one. The approaching boat flew the colours of Torm, and its occupants wore the same stark livery, black and white cloth beneath polished metal armour, the gauntlet of the loyal Fury displayed openly upon tabards, shields, and holy symbols. There were 8 of them. 4 ordinary crewmen handled the vessel, while the inspection party itself was considerably more imposing. A knight in half-plate, 2 disciples who carried themselves more like battle priests than common toll collectors, and an austere inquisitor whose attention immediately settled upon the skiff and the rather unusual collection of people aboard it. The vessels drew alongside. Hooks caught the rail. The Tormites boarded. They announced themselves as toll collectors out of El Turel and requested permission to inspect the vessel, its cargo, and those travelling aboard it. Considering the chain gang consisted largely of recently released prisoners, several of whom had considerably complicated relationships with the law, a thorough inspection promised to be inconvenient at best. Then Harmon de Lucerne stepped forward. For once the young noble appeared entirely within his natural element. He greeted the inspectors with effortless confidence, introduced himself with all the weight of the de Lucerne name behind him, and proceeded to bury the situation beneath courtesy, noble entitlement, and an apparently inexhaustible supply of charm. The knight questioned him. The inquisitor watched him. Harmon smiled. By the time the conversation ended, the inspection that had seemed inevitable only minutes before had somehow become unnecessary. The inquisitor gave the skiff one final suspicious look, but the Tormites returned to their vessel without opening a single crate. Their hooks were released, the 2 ships separated, and as the toll collectors disappeared back toward El Turel, the chain gang was forced to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. Harmon de Lucerne might actually be useful. Roughly a third of the way to Scornubel, during what had until then been a quiet evening, the river erupted. A colossal serpent lunged from the Sionthar. Its first strike killed Harmon's horse instantly. One moment the unfortunate animal stood aboard the skiff. The next, its head was gone. Then the battle began. Sir Cedric and Boltax rushed to the bow to meet the creature, while others scrambled for weapons, spells, or considerably safer positions. Some had been sleeping below deck and emerged only after the fighting had already begun. Magic streaked across the water. Great sword and fist crashed against scales. The serpent coiled around Sir Cedric, crushing the armoured knight within its massive body. Then Corvin Ash raised his hand. An eldritch blast struck the serpent's skull with devastating force. Its head burst apart. The creature collapsed back into the Sionthar. Unfortunately, it was still wrapped around Cedric. Knight and serpent vanished beneath the water together. Several unsuccessful rescue attempts followed, before the more agile members of the gang managed to use the skiff's poles and hooks to drag Sir Cedric out of his watery predicament. During the battle, Aidan had noticed something glinting between the serpent's teeth. They recovered it. A ring, and not merely jewellery. It was a ring of water-walking. Given the circumstances under which they found it, no one could accuse fate of lacking a sense of humour. The following evening, the chain gang finally arrived at the makeshift docks of Scornubel. Their first destination was the Raging Lion. 30 years earlier, it had apparently been fashionable. Very little effort had been made since then to preserve that distinction. A once gilded lion with its mouth permanently open guarded the entrance. Faded red curtains lined the walls. Moths and dirty hands had worked diligently upon the furnishings, and someone had been committed enough to the establishment's theme that even the chamber pots bore lion motifs. Still, the beds existed. The food was edible. The service eventually arrived. For the chain gang, these were luxuries. Boltax, however, still had work to do. He headed for the Bowl of Snakes, intending to honour his agreement with Nadir. He found the establishment closed, following a violent altercation. The unfortunate man left behind to clean the place was persuaded, largely through the compelling diplomatic argument of Baltax being 7.5 feet tall, to provide information. One tavern led to another, then an inn, then a gambling den. Eventually, Baltax reached the Jaded Unicorn, a converted warehouse serving primarily orcs, half-orcs and others polite society tended to classify as monstrous. There he found Oban, the hulking grey orc bouncer from the Bowl of Snakes. Oban could not tell Baltax where Kshashma lived. Apparently she had a habit of sleeping in a different location every night, depending upon whom she had seduced. He could, however, tell Baltax when she would next appear. With that, Baltax returned to the Raging Lion. His bedding was not silk that night. Then again, neither was anyone else's, not even Harmon's. The following morning, the company divided its responsibilities. Cap accompanied Harmon in search of another horse. Imogen and Stavros were sent for supplies. Raven was given no assignment at all. This may have had something to do with Harmon. At some point, the young noble had invited Raven to his room, presumably with intentions entirely consistent with his reputation. Less than a minute later, Harman emerged. 2 buttons at his neck were undone. His face was white as a sheet. He immediately hurried away, with Cap trailing behind. No one learned what had happened inside. No one was entirely certain they wanted to. The incident did, however, add to the gang's suspicions surrounding Cap. Ever since Count de Lucerne's private conversation with him, the former Flaming Fist officer had watched Harmon with extraordinary care. Cap knew something. The others simply did not know what. The rest of the gang accompanied Baltax back to the Bowl of Snakes. They arrived just in time to see Oban physically carrying a thick-set patron from the establishment. A man who had apparently believed himself intimidating until encountering an orc nearly 2 feet taller and considerably stronger. Oban deposited him outside with a warning, "Do not touch the dancers again." Inside, musicians hammered out a frantic rhythm while a dark-skinned tiefling dancer slowly removed a dress fashioned from countless pieces of brightly coloured cloth. None of the gang noticed that every piece disappeared the moment it touched the floor. The dress was an illusion. Then came Kshashma. Her performance was slower, hypnotic. Snakes wound through the dance as though they were extensions of her own body. Afterwards, Baltax found her and delivered Nadia's wooden box. Kshashma opened it carefully, her fingers pressing concealed catches in a particular sequence. Inside were documents, exactly as Baltax had suspected. Whatever they contained, Kshashma considered the delivery worthwhile. Baltax received 50 gold pieces for his trouble. On the way back to the Raging Lion, something strange happened. A street performer was entertaining passers-by with card tricks when he spoke a particular line. Suddenly the chain gang felt anger, not irritation, not suspicion, anger, sharp, immediate, and inexplicably personal. Then they looked at the performer's face. Nothing. No recognition, no reason for the emotion. The feeling vanished almost as quickly as it had arrived. Ipsy-bibsy bomb. The moment was gone. They were still trying to understand what had happened when another sensation washed through them. This one was weaker. Mirth. Someone was deeply amused by something. The source became apparent as they approached the Raging Lion. Raven was sitting beside the Gilded Lion outside the inn, speaking pleasantly to a severed human head lodged firmly between its jaws. "Poor thing, you've lost the rest of your body. You look awfully silly." Raven appeared entirely oblivious to the armed men surrounding her. The men were less amused. The head had belonged to their friend. They blamed Raven for his death. They wanted blood money. They also intended to take Raven away for what they called interrogation. The chain gang declined, forcefully. Steel came free of scabbards, and Scornubel Street became a battlefield. Magic, blade and fist tore through the thugs. Dark tendrils erupted from Raven as her normally delicate features twisted into something drawn from nightmare. Men trying to bring down Sir Cedric discovered that chainmail was considerably more effective protection than enthusiasm. Boltax stood surrounded, absorbing blows through sheer physical discipline and Goliath resilience. Corvin Ash confronted the leader and landed a devastating strike. Cedric answered every attack with the sweep of his greatsword. Aidan Vare found himself on the receiving end of several crossbow bolts and used magic to escape the worst of the fighting. Then someone else joined the battle, a masked warrior. Lean, fast and precise, the mysterious sword saint entered the melee alongside the chain gang. Moments later, arrows began raining down upon the crossbowmen from another masked figure. The remaining thugs broke. They ran. It did not save them. The sword saint and her companions hunted them through the streets until none remained. Only afterwards did the chain gang learn whom they had witnessed. The four masked warriors were known as the Faceless. They were Scornubel's personal marshals, and they maintained order using methods that tended to ensure repeat offenders were exceedingly rare. The chain gang retired to the Raging Lion, bruised, bloodied, and increasingly aware that something deeply strange was happening to them. That night the dreams returned. The following morning they left Scornubel along the tradeway, hoping to reach Trael before its gates closed for the night. Their greatest enemy proved initially to be Harmon's newly purchased horse. Cap had advised against buying it. Harmon had ignored him. The horse suffered from some sort of congenital hoof problem and slowed the entire company to a miserable pace. Sir Cedric eventually went so far as to speak with the animal through magic. The resulting conversation confirmed what everyone except Harmon had already accepted. No amount of divine healing was going to fix the problem. Tempers rose. Time passed. Finally Harmon agreed to abandon the horse. It limped away. For a while, as the chain gang neared Trael, they discovered the gates already closed. Behind them, the supposedly lame horse came thundering back along the road. It was moving considerably faster now. A pack of wolves was chasing it. The chain gang barely had time to prepare. One lantern above Trael's gate cast a weak pool of light across the road as the wolves closed in. Someone began pounding on the gate. Boltax considered the resulting panic distinctly unbecoming. Then the wolves attacked. One remained behind. Its body changed, bones lengthened, muscle swelled. The wolf rose onto two legs. A werewolf stood beneath the night sky. The wolves crashed into the chain gang. The abandoned horse was dragged down almost immediately and torn apart. Boltax charged directly into the pack and was quickly surrounded. Others formed defensive positions near the gate, but there were too many snapping jaws and too little room. Men and women were dragged from their feet. Fangs tore into legs. Aidan disappeared from between slavering mouths in a flash of magic, reappearing at a safer distance before hurling fire into one of the beasts. The wolf became cinders. Raven, apparently more disturbed by wolves than severed heads, cast a spell and vanished entirely. The werewolf drove into Stavros, Imogen, Harmon and Cap. Its claws opened Imogen. Its jaws closed around Harmon's shoulder. Cap managed to turn aside the worst of another attack with his shield. At last, the sounds of battle awakened Trael's gatekeeper. He appeared atop the battlements. He was extremely elderly. He was extremely near-sighted, and he absolutely refused to open the gate. He did, however, attempt to help with his bow. One shot wounded a wolf. Encouraged, he tried again. The second arrow struck Corlin in the shoulder. Fortunately, the wound was minor. Eventually, the wolves began to fall. Then, after a brutal struggle, the werewolf itself collapsed. Its monstrous body changed. Lying where the beast had fallen was a naked young man. Around his neck hung a small pouch. Inside, the chain gang found two things: a magical silver ring decorated with a shield motif, and a short note, "To keep you safe, my love." Whatever story had brought the young man to the road outside Triel had ended there. Haman demanded entrance to the town. Eventually the gatekeeper agreed. There remained the minor complication that the old man could no longer lift the heavy bar securing the gates. 10 minutes of considerable effort followed before the doors finally opened. Inside, the commotion woke much of Triel. The chain gang received medical treatment, food, and somewhere to sleep. But one concern overshadowed everything else. Haman had been bitten by a werewolf. If he had contracted lycanthropy, their incompetent, noble overseer might soon become something considerably more dangerous. Cap was especially worried. Under pressure, he finally revealed why. The magical marks Evibaran had placed upon them were tied to the control stone, and the fate of everyone carrying one of those marks was inextricably linked to whoever possessed that stone. At present, that person was Haman. Whatever happened to him could have consequences for all of them. The revelation did little to improve anyone's mood. Haman himself awoke apparently none the worse for wear, and, with characteristic enthusiasm, announced that they should continue their journey. The chain gang had little choice. The road from Triel toward Boareskir Bridge proved blessedly uneventful. There, somewhere along the outskirts of the settlement, the company finally learned something about the next stage of their mysterious assignment. They were introduced to Elgin Periwinkle, a gnomish alchemist of considerable reputation. Elgin was eccentric. Raven was Raven. They became friends almost immediately. At long last, Raven received the tea party she had apparently been destined to attend. Anyone glancing through the window of Elgin's hillside home might have questioned whether reality had quietly surrendered. Around a small circular table sat Raven, Elgin Periwinkle, a tiny winged devil, a house cat approximately 3 sizes larger than any house cat had a right to be, and an animatronic doll with soulless eyes dutifully pouring tea. Elgin cut slices of cake with the concentration of a surgeon performing delicate surgery. The rest of the chain gang decided there were some mysteries better left unexplored. They had work to do. Elgin needed basilisk saliva. In exchange for obtaining it, he promised to repay the favour. The company divided once again. Some would remain behind to guard Haman through the night, in case his recent bite resulted in any particularly hairy complications. The others would hunt the basilisk. Aidan Vere, Sir Cedric Valen, Baltax, Corland Zuriath, and Corvin Ash entered the nearby forest. Finding the creature proved easier than expected. Elgin's directions were good, and a basilisk leaves distinctive signs of its passing. A petrified finger here, fragments of stone that had once been flesh there. Then they found half of an elderly woman. She had become stone while carrying a basket of mushrooms. Her expression remained frozen in surprise. Much of the right side of the statue had already broken away. The gang continued. Eventually they found the creature's lair and prepared an ambush. The basilisk apparently had the same idea. Its attempt at counter-ambush failed. Fortunately, Elgin had warned them what they were facing. The adventurers spread out rather than presenting the monster with a convenient group of victims, while Haman had supplied them with a portable hole in case one of them succumbed completely to the creature's petrifying gaze. Baltax very nearly did. Stone began crawling across the Goliath's body. but through sheer force of will and physical resilience, Boltax halted the transformation before it could consume him entirely. The basilisk itself proved considerably less durable. The gang brought it down and harvested the saliva they had come to collect. Then they searched its lair. There they discovered a skeleton. It had clearly been dead for years. Its satchel was nearly disintegrated, yet the clothes upon its bones remained immaculately clean. So did several objects scattered among its possessions: a ring, a necklace, a strange pipe whose purpose remained unknown, an ivory six-sided die, a spell-book, and a walking cane that was unmistakably magical. Why such objects had remained untouched by age was yet another question for an expedition already collecting far too many of them. For now they had what Elgin Periwinkle had requested. The chain gang prepares to return to the eccentric alchemist. Harman remains under watch. The marks still bind them. The control stone remains in the hands of a man none of them particularly trusts to control anything. Somewhere behind them lie murders none of them fully understand. Ahead lies a mission whose true purpose Count de Lucerne has still not revealed. And increasingly the chain gang is beginning to suspect that the chains binding them together are far stranger than iron. Thus ends Session 1.